So how do we measure the project operations? PPC is how well we're doing what we said we're going to do. But there are other questions about, so at what rate are we working? Are we starting and stopping? The pictures that I showed earlier, we have work that got started and then it stopped. And it's been stopped when those pictures were taken. That work had been completed months before, but the system is not really complete. The pipe spools were installed, but everything's just stopped and waiting, and it was waiting for months. So this is work that's out of sequence. So when we're talking about operating efficiency, when you learn about the 8 or 10 wastes, like work starting and stopping, people waiting for work, work waiting for people, work waiting for equipment, and so on, people having to run around and move scaffolding here and there because they couldn't complete something. Now they're going to have to move it back. We're just adding waste into the system when we're doing all that. If you learn about that, you can begin to measure and look at how smoothly things work.
Welcome to the EBFC Show, the easier, better for construction podcast. I'm your host, Felipe Engineer-Manriquez. This show is all about the business of construction. Today's show is also sponsored by the Lean Construction Institute. LCI is working to lead the building industry in transforming its practices and culture. Its vision is to create a healthy and thriving industry that delivers outstanding project outcomes every time for everyone. Check the show notes for more information. Now, to the show. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. Back again, fourth time, Victor Ortiz, or as I lovingly know him as Vic. Vic has been on the show. We'll put all the show notes back in the description and all links to the past videos. I was telling Vic before we started recording, this is one of the most watched series on the channel. There's a lot of interested folks looking at Last Planner System. And I think, Vic, there's very few types of conversations like this, these very deep dives with all of this rich experience and banter. And Vic and I provide lots of banter with a mix of technical and real experiences. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you've been watching along with us now, I'll also make a binge-worthy, all parts combined episode if Vic and I land this Last Planner post-it note to double cross off X at the end of this, or if we have to go to a part 5, which I told Vic I am open to part 5. So I think without further ado, Vic, let's kick off the show and get started into this beautiful continuation of the Last Planner System. And I was doing my homework, Vic, while he's getting the screen share up. I was looking at the previous episodes and seeing some of the topics that we covered. And I think that this is exactly what people need to know. I love the title. Like, take it away, Vic, and I'll interrupt you as always. And today is not March 28th, just in case you're wondering, people, but this
yes.
This is how long.
Well, that's right. This is what happens when you save as and add new slides.
Yeah.
But this is a good perspective. We've been doing this a long time and adding to this. So that's exactly what's going on. Thanks for that catch.
Yeah, and you're welcome. Hey, and Vic, I just want to let you know that I was at an LCI event last week in Genentech, and we missed you that you couldn't come. But I'll tell you that I bumped into someone. So the first time you and I met in Walnut Creek, you were sitting to my right during the salad chat.
Mm-hmm.
And then to my left was sitting a person from a design firm. And I'm happy to say that she came back, and I told her it was like I don't know, it felt like a 7-year anniversary. Like we were, I couldn't call it a reunion because you weren't there. But if you would have been there, it was a coming back and seeing that in her role, she's been elevated to now an executive position in her design firm, and she's still coming to the LCI events. And we were chatting about how aggressive I was trying to convince them to let me teach Last Planner System to architects. And that's when you gave me my stern warning that people, you got to watch back episode number 1 when I first interviewed Vic, where we talked about that in more detail. And then again, we'll put a link in the show description for that episode.
Yeah.
And I thought it was just amazing, like going full circle back after all these years. People are still coming. Our community is strong.
That's right. That's right. And everybody should pay attention. You get into lean and Last Planner and managing the operations, and your career can take off. It's good. So, shall we dive in?
Yes.
All righty. So, welcome everybody. This is just a little reminder. This is where we started back in March of 23, looking at a whole bunch of different tasks. And Felipe and I have both looked at these and thought about, okay, what are we missing? What is there still to talk about? And we've found out that there's actually amazingly quite a lot still. We've talked about how the last planner is supposed to work and the different levels from master to phase to look aheads to weekly and daily work plans and all worked through all of that. And there's still a lot to talk about because this is actually kind of the linchpin that helps you get lean going in your organization. So here's what we have yet to go. Still a bunch of stuff. So I want to go back and talk to you about Leichert's original definition of lean because it gets lost over the years sometimes. We want to talk about why PMI's definition of project management is not the same thing as production management. And we'll go through more of these. We get some examples and some stories about these concepts. So I have these up on another screen next to me, and we're going to start going through them. And we'll finish up talking about, so if you are actually going to do all this stuff and do it the right way to get all the value that you really should be getting, um, we're talking about not a minor change. And so we're going to finish up talking about 5 levels of organizational change and where going lean actually fits in all of that and what that means for you if you're trying to make this stuff really work and take your organization lean and your career ahead. Right? So
Right.
with that, so way back before the lean construction started, or right around the beginning of it, everybody was looking at the auto industry and then at other industries and how to use lean. And the original idea here is that lean, what makes something lean, has sort of now expanded into, well, it's everything. It's all the people interactions, all of this other stuff. But all the good people interactions can be done in a lousy system that's not lean. And so it's important for all of us to understand when we're doing Last Planner that what we're trying to do with Last Planner is we're trying to create a lean operations system. Lean is an operations strategy. And in order to successfully do that operations strategy, we've got to get all the social stuff right too, because if you have one part of the system working under one philosophy and the rest of the system back in traditional stuff, there's going to be constant clash and pull, and it's going to create friction and interference. So this is really important to understand. This is from Leichert's Lean Thinking book. And this is what I think of as sort of the true north of lean in terms of operations. There's a lot more, like we're saying, but it's these 5 principles, and you should memorize these. Everyone should memorize these. Number one, value is defined by the customer's conditions of satisfaction. And by customer, we mean everybody who is going to accept the work that you just did. We need to understand what they need, how much they need in order to release their work. Everything from them to the inspectors, to the customers, to the owner, to the users, to everybody. If we don't understand what represents value through that entire chain of value propositions, we may be doing the wrong thing. So that's number one, is that the focus is on all these people who are, in essence, customers. And that implies that the people who are doing prerequisite work to what we're doing have to understand our conditions of satisfaction, which means we better be clear about how we want to work and so on. So number one, value is defined by the customer's conditions of satisfactions. Secondly, in our work planning, we tend to focus on tasks. And the tasks are, of course, important. That's the building blocks. But value, something, a completed area, a completed system, a completed set of work is delivered by a stream of activities. And most planning and most contracting by trade focuses on the activities of the trade or tasks. We don't focus on the flow. So we need to think of things in terms of a stream, and that's what Last Planner does for us if we're planning correctly, is we start seeing the flow of activities. And if we want to improve our efficiency, what we're really needing to look at is throughput, and we'll come back to this again. How well is the work flowing through the stream of activities? How fast, how much throughput, so we can measure how effective the system is. And so throughput depends on a smooth flow within the stream. So we've got value defined by the customer. Work is created not just by activities, but by a stream of activities. And that stream of activities needs to flow. And the flow should depend on and be triggered by a pull signal, by something that needs to get done by a certain time that pulls us into action. Okay. And then there is the continuous pursuit of perfection. So these 5 principles are essential. So I want to use that as a context to talk about some examples here. So here's another really important concept that goes along with this. This is something I learned way back when, as we were starting to develop the last planner system. There's always this question when we talk about pull about, well, when we're doing backward planning, if you're trying to define the optimal way of getting everybody in there being super efficient, how do you manage that so that people aren't working on top of each other? How do we make that go? And so there's this concept of dependency and variation, and it says simply that the more tightly coupled our activities are on a work plan, the more activities will be disrupted by variation. So the way we think about this is if you're in traffic on the freeway, the more dense the traffic, what happens to your speed? It slows down. If there's an accident, if you get somebody, and we see a lot of this these days, driving crazy and racing ahead and zipping in and out, if it startles people, they react, they may slow down, they may change lanes, they may do something. That startles the people behind them, and the more densely packed we are, the more any variation screws everything up and the more everything slows down. So what we're talking about here is that the general belief in construction is if you want to get the job done quicker or you want to get it done on time, the idea is to do as many activities as you can and as quickly as you can. And the problem is that then what happens is we get a traffic jam. So the idea of Last Planner is to design a smooth flow where there are just enough buffers in between things to make that work.
Well, that's one of the
Uh,
things too, Vic. If I just interrupt you for a second,
hmm?
that concept that you said so eloquently is one of the things that I will often warn teams. Like once we develop and we go through the beginnings of a pull plan and we get a plan, I tell the leaders, I said, you're gonna start to have so much good flow through the areas, and the area is going to look so clean. There will be pressure from the system, from people that are not involved in our plan directly. Other stakeholders will put pressure on you to put more work in progress because things look more ready than they've ever seen before. But it's going to
Right.
deviate. If they do that, they'll be deviating from the plan, and that'll interrupt their throughput because they will no longer have smooth flow through the stream, because the streams are not always obvious and evident to the people that are not involved in the direct planning. So this is an area where if you're doing less planner system, make your logistics plans or your flow plans super obvious and make them visual so that people can see visually where we're going, because the sticky notes are just words, or if you're using digital software, they're just words on a task on a digital screen. That does not communicate enough where we're going, where the next flow area is, where's the next area, where do we expect people to be. So you need a floor plan or a logistics plan, something visual to help you
Absolutely.
protect. And I saw on the last video, one of the last slides that you showed, Vic, when we were, part 3, we were looking at protecting the work. And I
All
think
right.
making this
That's
visual is part of the helping the protect. So
Yeah, we
Super
call
good
it
stuff.
shielding, and
Yes.
so that the idea is we try to make sure that we've got a clear area, all of the things that we need. We're going to talk about everything when you're doing constraint analysis, everything you need to think about. So the idea is just be aware that what we're trying to do is create a flow. And if you think about the freeway again, there is a balance between how many vehicles can be on the freeway at a time and have enough space in between and enough velocity so that you get throughput. In other words, the number of vehicles getting through each mile of the freeway is optimized. And when you get it overpacked and you try to say, well, throw more people at it, let's do more work, get more crews involved to speed this up, you may not be speeding it up at all. You're actually adding complexity, density, and variation because nobody knows what those crews are doing, so on. So another concept is that there are three types of buffers, really, just three. Capacity, which is your resources and ability to do stuff. There's inventory, or materials that you have on hand, and an inventory of available work, and time. And often what happens when we're trying to compress the time by adding more people is that, again, we just bung things up. Or if you're worried about not being able to continue the flow, we get too much inventory and then time is wasted running around trying to find the inventory. So again, another basic concept here that often is not talked about in most last planner trainings. All right, so let's get to an example. Okay, Felipe has seen this picture before. What I want to talk about here is the idea that you can do really excellent execution of a flawed plan and the thing is still bunged up. We often talk about how it's enough in Last Planner to just continuously try to improve things. But I want to talk about the idea that sometimes the problems are in a bigger system. So here's an example from this is from the building of an electrical generation plant, a gas cogen plant. And they're doing obviously lots of piping. And I'd like to call your attention to something that we only found out by accident. We had a contact from people in the procurement department wondering why the workers were asking for more threaded bar, steel bar with threads so you could put bolts on it and stuff. They're ordering much more than was originally in the plan and design and more than was in the budget. Where was all this steel bar going? And what we found out is that it was going into piping projects where valves or other instruments were missing. They were using it to create spacers where things that were not ordered um, were missing. And also you can see that they have some pretty improvised pipe supports here and equipment being used now because parts are missing and you can't complete this pipeline. You have more equipment that is being tied up here in incomplete work. This is work waiting for inventory at this point. So what you realize is that, yeah, maybe the people installing the pipe spools are doing good work, but the system around them is not supporting them. In other words, the operational system has flaws in it. There's some lack of coordination. We don't know unless we do some problem solving whether this is because there was a faulty design, because it didn't get procured, because there's a holdup in the manufacturer. We don't know what's going on, but we do know that it's not in control. There's some aspect of the production system. So on the work plan, you'd see the piping people putting in all these pipe spools. What you don't see is what's going on in the background, what's missing from the last planner system. So I think we showed this before. This is, a very kind of abstract way of looking at how one task feeds the next task feeds the next task. And when we are doing this, when we're putting together the plan, we have, okay, so here's our final deliverable. What things need to be done, absolutely done before we can claim that we've hit this milestone? And before these things, what work needs to be done that releases these tasks? and what needs to be done before in order to release this task. And that's the way we move back. That's what we're asking. And we want to think about how much work by how many people at what pace needs to be done to release the next crew to get in there and do whatever they're doing, the next trade. So what we've got here is conditions of satisfaction being defined as we move backwards, building the plan, and the work, of course, is moving in this direction. So this is creating pull. This is kind of the schedule now pushing things forward. So in Last Planner, there is always a balance of pull and push.
Yeah, I'll just say for people listening to the podcast on audio only, be sure to come back to the YouTube and see these beautiful visuals that Vic has. We'll put a link in the podcast description for the YouTube channel as well, so that people on whatever podcast platform that you're listening on, you can one tap and check out these visuals as well. These are
Good.
very good slides that I highly recommend you take a look at and understand what Vic is talking about. The words alone might not do it, right, Vic?
I wish they would, but they don't. Yeah, it's important because this is visual planning, as we were talking about. And whether it's, what we're doing here is just a look at post-it notes. But the key thing is that there are arrows between the post-it notes. We're making sure that the dependency relationships, in other words, for each task, what is it that we're trying to complete that meets the conditions of satisfaction of the next person in line? And do we understand that? And that's what the negotiation is that should be going on in your phase planning. Is that kind of detailed? How much work do you need before you can start working? How quickly am I going to move through an area? How many people do you need in your crew to keep up with me? And what releases the work for them to start? And what pace will they be going at in order to make a smooth flow?
Yeah, for all the managers listening to this, like you're thinking that we're taking a lot of time to explain it, and maybe we are, but in practice, these conversations don't happen if you, the manager, the leader of this project, don't make the space and don't use. I've never seen these conversations happen without last planner system. Let's put it that way. And
Yeah,
then when they do happen between the trades or even in design between designers, the conversations only take seconds. Like
yeah,
for people to describe what they need, they're very natural. They occur naturally. They happen very quickly. And so that's just something to be aware of. It's not something that takes days and days and days, or, you're not writing like forms. It's just a natural person to person dialogue.
yeah. So I'll say your earlier question about before and after Last Planner. This work was done before Last Planner was brought to the project. And the reason Last Planner was brought to the project was because, as is so often the case, it was over budget and behind schedule. And we started looking at the work that was being done, and we saw situations like this. And here's another example from the same project. Now, these are in this was a gas turbine cogeneration plant. So you have these massive steel pipes that are bringing very high pressure, high temperature steam to the turbine that's going to do the cogeneration after the jet engines create the heat and heat the water and create the steam and so on. And another procurement item that was coming along were these chain hoists. These chain hoists were being ordered. And we were sure that there were enough of them per the design and per the schedule to do the work. Now, back here in the middle is this cylindrical thing. This is actually a pipe hanger, and it's on a piston. It's a spring-loaded pipe hanger because these things, as steam comes through them, vibrate and move around and jump all over the place. So you need this kind of hanger in order to complete the pipe spool. Well, look what's happening here. Where there should be that engineered hammer or engineered hanger, there's just a safety bar. Notice it's welded on here. There's all of these welds here. What you see here is workaround going on. What you don't see is that there was, of course, a big scaffold under this thing that when the engineered pipe hanger didn't show up, the scaffold, people needed to move somewhere else. So the scaffold goes down. So we've just created, for people who know about the 8 or 10 forms of waste, we just created multiple types of waste. Extra work, unnecessary work, rework, um, and some hazards, health hazards, possible dangers here and so on, extra costs for extra material and so on. Now, what happens when we look at something like this is that we realize that work is being put on the plan and being committed to be done with an inadequate constraint analysis. In other words, there's no adequate system in place to control whether all of the materials that are needed, all of the equipment that's needed is ready before they put the work on the plan. That's the pre-last planner system. So if we go back to this little graphic here, what you realize if we're talking about this pipe support that's missing there, that hanger, there is a work stream that was not included in the planning because we think of last planner, first of all, as being just the people who are going to be installing on site. And when you start doing last planner and you're finding out why work isn't being completed, well, you start finding out it's often it has to do with engineering, it has to do with the supply chain, and so on. So if you're doing last planner, and we've got something like this installing the pipe support, before you commit, you should be looking at, do we have everything we need in order to do this task? Clearly, that analysis was not being done. And if we think of our last planner as having to include the make-ready work, the supply work, and so on, we can do a backward pass from installing this pipe support. Is it there on site and ready to install? Before it can be on site and ready to install, it has to be received in inventory. Before that, it has to be shipped. Before that, it had to be assembled. Before that, it had to be ordered. Before that, it had to be designed. That's a work stream. That's a work stream that produces a pipe support on site ready to install when it's needed. If we are not considering these additional work streams, we're only trying to control part of the system. And so the part of the system we're trying to control will always be limited by how out of control the rest of the system is. And if people say, well, we do last planner and it's not working that well, my guess is that a lot of it has to do with your last planner is not comprehensive enough.
We hear all the time that building enclosure is the #1 problem in construction. And when the task of the building enclosure is presented with so much pressure, it's something most of us would want to avoid. Until now, there has never been a course to teach someone how to manage a building enclosure. Building enclosure is a problem for every company, and the solution is often to ask someone within to try to find training or provide training to their teams to avoid these issues. Field Verified's enclosure management course is the answer to that problem. We learned the hard way, we've learned through failure, we've learned from others. This course, our team, will help those people who are assigned to manage the building enclosure be successful the first time so that they're spared some of the suffering and hardships that all of us went through. There's so much opportunity for a high return on investment, not just when an individual attends and all of the skills that they'll achieve, but when a team participates together, they can raise their level of performance by knowing what each other can do, what to expect, and they can raise the level of performance of that company as their careers excel and the company elevates along with them. The training is built on the science of how people learn. We capture all of the components that are necessary to master a skill. There's a hands-on component to the training where we're building a masonry mock-up, a metal panel mock-up, we're doing EFIS, and even installing a window that later you get to test. The hands-on training gives us the opportunity to translate the lines on paper to actual construction in the field. We always laugh because after the training, people come up and say, you know, this isn't just about building enclosure. There's a lot of leadership in here. There are a lot of people skills. That's because those skills are necessary to be successful in building enclosure and in construction. We'd love to see you get started right away. We have lots of options available. They can come to us in person at Field Verified in Phoenix, or we can bring the entire operation to your facility and train up to 25 people at a time. And we've created an online training that's available for people who might not be able to attend in person. Go to the website and contact us. We're going to start by understanding what problems you're currently experiencing and develop a specific program that's right for the needs of your company.
That's a fact. But just recently, there was a team I was working with, and they had said, Vic, they made a comment that we're planning too early for this upcoming work. It was the last planner meeting. We were doing a pull plan to just get a sequence of work out because we didn't have enough detail in the master schedule for this work sequence of some significant underground activities below a building foundation. And as we're going through the plan, it became obvious to me that there was something missing in their planning. They had not considered what make work ready steps they needed. And I said, I just have to ask, and it might be a stupid question. I raised my hand and I said, do you have the submittals for the underground assemblies been gone through the system, are approved, and the materials procured and ready? Because this work is 60 days away. And, this is the time of tariffs, and we're still seeing COVID, supply chain disruptions, even all these years later. And the people said, Felipe, don't worry about it. We have plenty of time. We're super early. And I said, whenever someone tells me not to worry, that's not the answer I'm looking for. I'm looking for submittals approved, material procured. It's on order. This is the delivery date. And I didn't hear any of that. So I said, I respectfully disagree with my don't worry. I'm worried now. Now I'm worried.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm writing this down as a constraint. And fast forward, now we're about a month and a half away. So it's only been a couple of weeks. The person that told me not to worry came up to me in a quiet tone and said, we just got the submittals for that underground work. The meeting that we had to plan the work triggered the trade contractor to realize that they don't have the materials on order for this work that's coming up. And I said, thank goodness.
Yeah. Well, so this is the idea of whole systems thinking instead of small activity thinking. And whole systems thinking means you got to think about the whole project as a production system, right?
Yeah.
And the production system on site is supported by a whole bunch of production activity off site. Every one of those production activities is a work stream, and every one of those work streams should flow. And it brings up here, I guess, we can talk about the idea of last responsible moment. And what's the difference between a schedule and an operations control system? A schedule is just tasks on a calendar, on dates. So if you're starting off with your last planner with a big board with a bunch of dates on it, that's probably scheduling and not pull planning. What we want to do, you notice there's no dates here. What we want to do is look at each one of these tasks and say, okay, what's the volume of work? How long will that take to do that, given what we expect are the optimum resources? That gives us a duration for that task. That means that the last responsible moment, if that task needs to be done before the final thing, the last responsible moment to start that task is the beginning of that duration so it can get done in time for the work plan. And that means that the last responsible moment to finish the task before it, the last time you could do that is before the start of this one. They have to be coupled. And how long is the duration of this one? Well, then the last responsible moment to start this is determined by the duration. Okay. How about this? So this one needs to be done in order for the last responsible start time. And that's the absolute sort of unbuffered flow of all of this. And if we go back and we plan in that way, we're thinking about it, what will happen is when we put those durations together, we will know what the dates are that the work has to be done. And if we add all of these durations from here to here to here, we add all of those up, and the start date, the last responsible start date of this first task is 3 weeks ago, we know that we're behind schedule. We know that this milestone is going to be missed unless we tweak something. Okay, so we know ahead of time when we're going to start getting in trouble, or that we already are in trouble. So if you're using a software system that doesn't require that you define these dependencies, doesn't require that you put in durations, doesn't require that you link all of those durations to this final date, you're not doing last planner system correctly. You're just scheduling. You're just throwing tasks on a calendar, which is what we've always done in the past. So, okay, enough on that one. And so we've hit the idea of dependency and variation. We can say that, you know, you can have an excellent plan, or you can have a flawed plan like the one with the pipes that we're talking about. You know, this one, they might have had a good execution of a flawed plan here, and what you get is flawed results. I mean, that's the point. So just focusing on good trade execution without looking at the larger plan is still not going to get you where you want to go. It's important, but it's not enough. All right. So for each of those tasks that we're looking at that are, you know, like that are on a post-it, way back when Greg Howell was struggling with how do you tell people what a well-defined task is? How do you know that a task that you're putting on a post-it has the information you need to have? And he came up with something that he called the 3 S's, criteria for a well-defined task. And there's another thing for you to memorize. Okay. So his 3 S's were: 1, size. Is it the right amount of work per day, per crew, per space? Is it clearly defined? How many studs are we putting in? How many pipe spools? How many inches of weld? How many exterior panels, etc. So is the size right for the resources that we have? Okay. So that seems fairly simple, but I again look at a lot of last planner systems and a lot of software that doesn't require us to do this. And they aren't really specifying how much work. They're just saying we're going to get this area done in a week.
I even see people just say on their tag, install pipe.
Right.
And there's no indication of area, quantity,
Exactly.
crew, nothing. No
Right.
considerations. And
Right.
people think it's
So
okay.
that's what Greg meant by size. His number 2 was sequence. Looking at each post-it relative to the other post-its, is it clear that that's the work that needs to be done before the next one can start? And is that the work that needs to be done before the next one can start? Is the sequence moving backwards correct? And have we defined how much work, going back to size, needs to be done in that sequence in order to release the next bunch of work for the next group? Okay. So sequence is the logical order of the work in order to create flow. And for most of us, that is kind of common sense because there's certain things that have to be done before other things can be done. So that's not too hard, but the question is, have we defined it in the work task so that we know that it fits, that it supports the rest of the work that needs to be done? And the last one is called soundness. And soundness means, is it well enough defined? Is it clear? Those 2 things, size and sequence, are they all with the task clearly defined so that anybody would know what exactly the task is, in what amount, and where it's going, and so on? The other elements of soundness have to do with constraint analysis. Are all the prerequisites and dependencies addressed? Can we confirm that the area, the materials, the approvals, everything are in fact ready to release this work? Is the work released? So here's another feature of some Last Planner software and not others. If you are allowed by the system to put a task on the plan and the prerequisite work that task is depending on has not either been committed or completed, the system should have a rule in it that says you can't put that on the plan because the prerequisite work is not done, or the prerequisite acquisition of approvals and materials and specifications and so on is not done. So that requires that we do constraint analysis. So soundness has to do with, before I commit, and we've talked about the idea of reliable commitments and the importance of being able to say no. Well, here are some reasons, good, sound, logical reasons for saying no. If you don't have the work released, how can you say yes? How can you reliably commit to something where the prerequisites aren't done? Unless those prerequisite steps being done by somebody else have been committed and they are certain that they have everything they need, that their task is sound enough that they can do it to release your work. All right. Law. Okay. So that gets us into then, in order to do soundness, you have to know what are the typical constraints. Before we commit to a plan or to any task, we should ask the following questions. Now, the nice thing about this is that the categories that we're going to talk about here are the same things that usually show up in your root cause for plan failure. So you can categorize these things the same way. So here's some just common sense ones. Do we have materials? Do we have the tools and equipment that we need? Do we have the space cleared out? Is the prerequisite work complete and are their materials and everything cleared out? Do we have the information we need? RFIs, documents, etc. Do we have approvals? Do we have the crew? Are they capable, informed, committed, healthy, ready to work, etc.? So, and do we have a great production plan where the work we're going to do fits in and works for us and for all of our colleagues? Okay. So again, these are the things that if they're not in place, you're going to see these showing up in root cause analysis. So the great production plan was clearly not in place for the project I was showing these pictures of where valves or pipe hangers or other things are missing. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense to folks. All right, so we're going through this pretty quickly here. And this is going to give us some chance to have some more discussion, Felipe.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was looking at the time and I was thinking episode 5 is imminent.
Maybe we'll see. So I wanted to think about, we've talked about the importance of whole systems thinking. When I think about whole systems, uh, what we're talking about again is all of the work that feeds into whatever is happening on site, or all of the work that feeds into completing some element of design. So that's important. I'll come back to that a little bit. We have, when we're doing Last Planner, a lot of things that work against being able to implement Last Planner, because obviously this is a considerable change. If we're used to, for instance, saying that means and methods of how work is delivered is by contract the purview of each trade. They're supposed to know what they're doing. We just let them go. We don't mess with that as project managers. That's kind of gospel in PMI speak here. If we have that kind of approach, what we invite is everybody, basically doing their own thing, which invites variation. And if we're trying to cram a lot of work in, as we've talked about before, the more variation is there, the tighter the dependencies, the more effect it has on everybody, the more variation it creates on everybody else, and we get this cycle of things not working very well. All right. So when we introduce Last Planner and our contracting process and our assumptions about what is the best way to let the trades work is that you just let them go and they don't have to talk to each other. Now you bring in Last Planner, it flies in the face of culture, it flies in the face of contract, it flies in the face of the pride of the superintendent, whose focus is on being the mastermind of how the trade gets their work done in order to meet the very slim margin that we've bid in the contract and so on. It challenges a whole lot of stuff. So I think that many of us go into doing lean with the idea that we can try a few things, and really and we say this in LCI, I think somewhat mistakenly, that really, as long as there's continuous improvement, you just get people trying to improve things, everything's going to be fine. And I would challenge that. So this model that we're talking about here, levels of organization, is going to show us that actually going lean in a project and in your organization is not a simple process. It can't be done simply by doing continuous process improvement. So let me talk about these 5 levels. So we know that in any work, in any project, there is variation. This is one of the things that Howell and Ballard found was a reason why we were always behind schedule and over budget, was that we did not manage and control the amount of variation. We needed to do something to reduce variation, and that's why they created the last planner system, to try to make the whole flow more visible and therefore do constraint analysis and therefore make more reliable commitments and therefore reduce variations so that people could work and not do a lot of buffering and a lot of workarounds and a lot of stuff that absorbed money and resources and so on. But in any work system, there's going to be some variation. And if we think about W. Edwards Deming talking about a work system that's in control, you should have some idea about how it's supposed to perform, how the work system is supposed to perform. How many studs can we put up? What is the rate at which rough-in can happen, and so on. We should have some idea about that. But we know there will be some variation. As long as we're within our buffered time frame and sequence of work, we just adjust to normal variation. And we do that by having the daily huddles. And we say, well, we got pipes full less than we wanted to. Is there a way we can adjust tomorrow? So that's adjusting to normal variation. That doesn't require a lot of, teamwork or something else. So we do that. But when we find that there's something wrong in the system, now we go to level 2, which is continuous process improvement, called CQI. And continuous improvement now requires that we recognize that there's something that is more than normal variation. There's some larger source of variation, probably outside the system, or something we're doing wrong, or some equipment that's not working, or some material that's not working. And we now need to put specific effort into improving that process. And that requires some teamwork, some problem solving, some kind of work. So the basic process is going along pretty much as it has, but we are now making tweaks, redesigning things, testing them, and seeing what's going on. It's not a major process change. It is improvement and tweaking. Okay. So level 1 is just adjusting to, as crap happens, we take care of it. Level 2 is something that's causing crap regularly. We need to go and change that. Level 3 is what we call business process reengineering. And in business process reengineering, we recognize that we've done about as much improvement as we can in the process as it exists. And if we don't rethink this bugger, we're going to be plagued by its limitations. So Deming sagely said, nobody can perform better than the limits of the system in which they work allow. So when the system's gotten as good as it can get, and the performance is still not competitive or not where we want it to be, you have to rethink the process. So in the cases we were talking about, this project needed to rethink the whole way that procurement was done, that materials were delivered, and so on, because that had nothing to do with the work that was actually happening on site. The two processes were completely disengaged, and we need to re-engineer the process. So that requires, again, specific teamwork and people skilled in laying out what the business process is, finding the breakdowns, and making changes. So here we go when you propose, say, that you're going to do something like business process reengineering, and we're going to integrate our procurement process and our materials management process into the last planner system so that we can see the flow of everything going into the actual installation work on site. But your contracts don't allow that to happen. People say, we're not paid to do that. That's not our job. There's nothing in the contract for that. Or the culture says, well, no, that's up to the project manager or the scheduler to handle that. We don't need any team for that. What you've got is an organizational misalignment. And when you get to organization redesign, so we're going from normal variation to continuous improvement within an existing process, to rethinking the process, to now realizing that our organization is out of whack. Now you've got major change that requires leadership to lead organizational transformation. And the final level, I think of Todd Zabel with Strategic Project Solutions, used to have a company called Pacific Contracting, and they did roofing and sealants. And what Todd did, here's level 5, is he completely reinvented the organization. He just blew it up. And he said, you know what? We're going to be fighting the same old battles. We'll be tail wagging us as the dog in every project we're on, unless we can change the industry. And we're going to create this company, Strategic Project Solutions, to change the way the construction industry works. And we're going to change from being a roofing business to being a consulting business. And you see every once in a while businesses blowing up and rethinking themselves. Now that's extreme, and in the construction industry, we don't see that happen very often. But if I would say, Felipe, as you listen to this, if you think about which level of change is a real lean implementation, if you're going to do a lean transformation of your company or of your project, where does that fall in these 5?
I get all 5, but in order to make it so that it actually gives people in the system what they want, you have to go all the way to 5 and blow it up.
Well,
Because, like, I mean, you could argue that you could. I'll say,
yeah.
Vic, you could argue that you could get all the way to 4. Now, I'll tell you, in my experience, I've been in this a type of role, a lean role, for
Mhm.
more. I think I've crossed the decade mark now in 2 different organizations and a consultancy that I do. And in my consultancy, I get to go to number 5 and kaboom all the time because it's
Mhm.
a small team. But in organizations, a lot of the times they won't do 3 or 4 because they're making enough money and people are satisfied. And I say making enough money, there's more. It's more complicated than just how much money people make. But I'm kind of just simplifying for terms, just looking at the time, how much time we have left. I'm just
Yeah,
simplifying and just bottom lining it to dollars.
yeah,
But even just
yeah,
what people get out of why they go to work, it you need some motivational type of energy.
right.
And like Todd, in his experience, when he learned these different processes, he had now a contrasting experience and he could not go backwards. And I've seen a lot of people that have had these integrated project experiences. The next project that the organization lands for them isn't an IPD project and they have to go back to traditional design bid build. Those people typically leave the industry. Like they just
Yeah,
leave or they go and join another firm because
right.
once you've experienced nice flow, you don't want to go back to fighting with people
No,
over stuff that they don't even care
exactly.
about.
When you've worked in a place where people respect you and are interested in your opinion, and you get a boss who couldn't care less, you want to get out of there quick.
Yeah.
Well, I guess my takeaway in this is that when I look at some of our Northern California LCI members, um, some of the big mechanical engineering firms are still doing mechanical engineering, and um, various construction management firms are doing construction management, but they've had to rethink how they do it. And so, at a minimum, you're going to do a bunch of business process reengineering on the project and to get things going. And I mean, obvious example is things like procurement out of control, and you're getting materials you don't need before you need them, and you're having to create more laydown space. You're having to move um, uh, materials around. You're losing stuff. Stuff's getting damaged. That's a sign that you need to do business process reengineering. Uh, when you go to an IPD contract from a design bid build, that's organizational redesign. You're now
Right.
engaging people in a different place. You're creating big rooms. You're creating these teams, this whole team structure. You're changing the way the management works. You're changing the way the reward system works. You're organizing in a new way. And that's organizational redesign. And so I think the point about this now, what happens is like companies like yours that start getting it right, you, DPR, and a bunch of others, you start
Bolt.
creating consulting
Don't forget to
practices.
say Bolt.
Yeah.
Don't
Bolt.
forget to
Yep.
say Bolt too.
Yep.
Yeah.
So and Bolt, right, exactly. You start creating consulting capacity. In other words, you haven't really changed the core business. I would argue it's not a complete reinvention. What you're doing is you're inventing new aspects. You're creating new processes and things. The major takeaway from this for me is that if you're in a company that's saying, well, we're going to go lean or we're going to take this project lean, you better be prepared on a leadership and management level to do a bunch of rethinking and retraining and reorganizing and continuously measuring how well what we're putting in place is working. And that is a much more hands-on, engaged leadership style than sitting back and waiting for the OAC meeting, once every 2 weeks or whatever. Okay. All right. Let's see what else is on the list here. So we've talked about last responsible moment, work streams, including make ready work, constraint analysis, the importance of whole systems thinking, that everything needs to fit together from your big whole way of conceiving of your project down to the daily tasks. Um, so let's talk about, well, what should we be doing um, if you want to go through all of this work? Um, I want to talk a little bit about, before I do that, I talk about root cause analysis, a little bit of wisdom about root cause analysis. In the last planner system, we know that we're supposed to have a weekly work plan. We're supposed to have daily commitments. We're supposed to have a huddle. At the huddle, we're talking about what we did get done, didn't get done. On the weekly level, we're talking about what got done, didn't get done, and so on. When there's a planned failure, when something doesn't get done, the instinct is to say, all right, who screwed up? Whose fault is it? And that sets us up to be at swords points with each other. And it's not productive. The blame is not productive. It's not really even relevant. What we should be thinking about is how the system is not working. Something in the way we set this up isn't set up for success. So the first lesson I have about root cause analysis is that people always do, unless they're a sociopath or something, they always do what they think is right. Maybe you could claim that even
No,
sociopaths
no, I would say even sociopaths think that they're right.
yeah, they think they're doing something right, and
Yeah.
it's disastrous. But if we assume that people don't make bad choices on purpose, we make the choices we make because this comports with how we understand work is supposed to get done, how the project is supposed to get done, how we've been taught to work. So people are always making the best choices. So to assume that somebody's stupid or bad doesn't honor the fact that they're doing what they know how to do. So what we do, because we're doing what we think is right, involves a choice. And the choices are all going on in our head kind of automatically. We can see the activity, but we don't see the choices that people are making or that we are making. But what we do is a result of choices we make, and the choices we make are based on some kind of underlying mental model about how things work. What's right to do, what's wrong to do. The last planner system fundamentally changes the underlying mental model. If we understand the reason Felipe and I are talking about these principles is that if you don't understand the principles, you don't understand how profoundly we're changing the understanding of construction as an operational system, a big operational production system, rather than thinking of it as just a project with a bunch of trades each doing their thing. We want to think about each project as if we're designing a whole new production system that is specifically optimized for the kind of project we're about to build. So the underlying mental model has to change in this. So the ultimate driver of ineffective systems and process failure is a flawed underlying mental model. That's what drives bad choices. When we get bad choices, we do the wrong action. When we do the wrong action or an ineffective action, we get bad results. And the bad results are what show up to us as a problem. So you got to peel back from the problem when we're doing 5 whys and go back to, at some level, if you're going to go far enough, you're going to realize that whatever happened happened because somebody did something they thought was the right thing to do. And the reason they thought it was the right thing to do was because that's how they understand things are supposed to be. And as long as that's their understanding, they're going to continue to do things that they think are right because people want to do the right thing. So we have to get down into what has to change in our thinking. So to change the underlying mental model, you have to go beyond the limits of the current thinking. We have to reach out and look at how other people are doing things. What are the best practices? And often that means even going to other industries, which is, of course, what we've done with the last planner and with lean in construction. We looked at the auto industry, we looked at manufacturing industries and said, well, we have a lot of manufacturing that goes on in our supply chain, but on site, we got a different kind of project-based production system. What can we learn from others and how do we adapt that to the project environment? Because we don't have one assembly line going on over and over and over. We have a whole bunch of production flows that flow into each other that all need to be coordinated, that have a lot of different stakeholders in them, that have a lot of different constraints on them, and we have to have a very robust system of managing production. And that's what the last planner system is designed to be, is a production system.
Yeah, and I would just caution people too. Like I know you said best practices, Vic, but in my experience, at least, just other alternative practices. They don't have to even be the best. Like I've seen even very terrible Kanban practices perform and give people exponentially better results versus other things because, like you said, it changes your mental model. If you're using basic Kanban practices, you're no longer pushing things on the system. You're using pull in the system, which changes your whole idea of when work should happen because you wait for downstream work or upstream work to pull downstream work. And that's different than just pushing against dates. And what you often see is just a lowering of the work in progress, which allows for much better flow. And you get a lot better implementation. It doesn't have to even be perfect. It could just be like you, to use your words from earlier today, a crappy, crappy implementation,
Right.
crappy practice. And it's going to be much better than the other because the other mental model is like you're talking about superintendents, and it's not limited to just them. I would say the same is true for executives and other project leaders, thinking that they're the only one that knows how to schedule the entire project because they've built, 2 hospitals before or 3 gas plants before, or this is their 10th solar field, and they think that they're the only ones that know. That's a mental model too that thinks that you have to be the superhero, the all-knowing eye
Right.
that tells everybody else what to do, the poor little peons, and that's not true either. That's a
Right.
that's a flawed mental model.
Yeah.
Construction is a team sport, and it takes a team. It does absolutely take some people with perspective and vision. We call that leadership that can change their perspective, see the whole thing working or not working, and then spend some of that leadership equity and make changes.
Right.
Learning
Yeah.
from others is, you put it on here. I'm so glad you did. I think that's really underrated And you can tell, I'll give everybody, here's the quick to know. Does your leader embody this learning from others? If they never ask you a question, then they don't. If they're always just dictating and telling you things, then they don't value learning from others for some strange reason. Like, I don't know why. They're probably a product of the system, Vic.
Well, and I think often, again, we've talked about this in the leadership courses, Felipe, about the idea that, there's doing and planning to do and planning to plan, that people are rewarded for being good at doing, not necessarily rewarded for being good at planning. And then when they get up to a level of management where they can't do all the planning, they actually need to get others to plan. Suddenly their job changes from being a planner to being the orchestrator of getting other people to plan. Now you're dealing with process design, and process design is not the same thing as doing the task. And most of us don't have skills in that. And that's really scary for people. Suddenly I've gotten promoted. I'm feeling good about myself. And suddenly I realize, oh crap, I don't have the skills I need. But I sure don't want to let anybody know that because I just got a promotion. And so people fall back to doing whatever they've been doing in the past. So I would say that, when you think of your Kanban example, somebody has the idea, even if the implementation is imperfect, somebody has the idea that there is a best practice known as Kanban. And like there's a best practice known as pull planning. Now, the continuous improvement comes from working at improving how our skills at doing that best practice. But if nobody knows what the best practice is, as Deming would say, if you don't have some theory about how it's supposed to work, you can't measure and find out if it's really working, which is why we're doing this whole series on Last Planner. If people don't have some understanding about what this is actually supposed to be doing, how do you know whether you're doing it right? So I'm going to go to the last slide, and I think we're going to be done in 4 sessions.
Wow. Oh,
Maybe
look at
I'm
that.
not.
That
Maybe
was
I'm
the
not
last
going to
slide.
go to that. Let me just talk about it a little bit. Because I didn't create a slide. I'm going to
Yeah.
stop sharing here. The last thing I was going to talk about is kind of what should we be doing now if we're doing Last Planner. And one of the things we should be doing is kind of measuring. We were just talking about you need to have some idea, some theory about how this is supposed to work, what the results are supposed to be. If you don't know that, you can't measure your progress towards that. So what are we supposed to measure? We should be measuring not just PPC, that's just one little measure. And what we're trying to do is understand how efficiently our project operations are working. So how do we measure the project operations? PPC is how well we're doing what we said we're going to do. But there are other questions about, so at what rate are we working? Are we starting and stopping? The pictures that I showed earlier, we have work that got started and then it stopped. And it's been stopped when those pictures were taken. That work had been completed months before, but the system is not really complete. The pipe spools were installed, but everything's just stopped and waiting, and it was waiting for months. So this is work that's out of sequence. So when we're talking about operating efficiency, when you learn about the 8 or 10 wastes, like work starting and stopping, people waiting for work, work waiting for people, work waiting for equipment, and so on, people having to run around and move scaffolding here and there because they couldn't complete something. Now they're going to have to move it back. We're just adding waste into the system when we're doing all that. If you learn about that, you can begin to measure and look at how smoothly things work. So what are the things we're trying to measure? We're trying to measure how efficiently are we working. So getting rid of rework and waste and so on is one measure of efficiency. How about do we have to do things over or correct things? Well, that's quality, right? Is it fit for purpose? Are there problems in any of the materials? So efficiency, quality. And here's one we don't really understand very well, most of us, which is throughput. And throughput is the rate at which stuff is getting installed. So everybody who's learned about tact planning and is studying or trying to implement TACT planning, the reason we use TACT, this balancing of crew size and rate and everything, is we want to have as close to an optimal flow of work. So you don't have one trade bringing in as many people as they can to get the work in an area done as fast as they can if the following crew can't even start. If they complete it in 2 days instead of 5 days because they added more people, now you got a whole bunch of people with nothing to do for 3 days, and you're paying them to do nothing. So what we want to do is look at the throughput rate, and the throughput rate is whatever it is that we're trying to build. Say, you were talking about foundations and underground work and so on in a project. If that's going to require us doing a bunch of footings, say, in different areas, and the footings are going to have some anchor bolts and so on in them, and you've got different sizes, and you're going through, we can look at what is the rate of putting together a footing. Do we put the frame and then wait a while before somebody comes and does the rebar? Do we then pour the concrete and wait longer than we need to before we can strike the frame and move to another thing? You can look at, are the tasks tightly coupled so that the completion of any piece of work that we're doing, which involves multiple steps, flows in a nice start to stop process without delays, without waiting, and so on.
And it's one of the things we found too, Vic. We found that downstream, we had a constraint when structural steel would be on site. And we had to tell the team, temper your continual improvement mindset, because if you accelerate this underground too fast, then you're going to have the site sitting idle, waiting for steel to show up. And so we wanted to just optimize the system to give us sufficient buffer and review back what Vic said about the different types of buffer, because that's important to have, so that we could reliably be ready to flow right into structural steel.
Yep. So we've talked, and that's a great example. Why are we doing things faster than we need to? Again, the underlying mental model with people is usually, let's get this done as quickly as possible. The more tasks we get out of the way, the faster the job will get done. But in fact, if you pile on resources, then you have to demobilize them and remove equipment, and then that stuff sits out, open holes and so on. It's a hazard. It's dirt's going to blow in there. All kinds of stuff is going to happen. That isn't adding any value at all. So again, we need to understand the wastes. The other thing that we need to measure is job satisfaction. How are people feeling? What's the team spirit? Are people jazzed? And people who come to work for us in these projects like to get her done. They're get her done people.
Yeah.
And sitting around racing to get something done and then having nothing to do, maybe running off and working someplace else that now is out of sequence and unplanned, and now is going to have to be undone or redone or something else, frustrates them. Job satisfaction, team spirit is enhanced by having a system where people collaborate, plan, get work done once, right, and feel proud of it, and so on.
Yeah, and I'd say, like, you have to, all the continuous improvement people watching the show, which there's a lot of you, temper your enthusiasm for the next thing to throw on top of the team. Like Vic and I have talked about this more in our leadership workshop as well. There's a limit to how much people can withstand for change. And even when you have some get or done folks on your team, that isn't everybody. You got to look at the team holistically. How much change can my team withstand? So you want to be periodically looking, what is the morale of my team? Don't introduce more difficult things when morale is low. That's a recipe for just bad outcomes. Stabilize so that people are having a good experience. And if you have more knowledge of the theory of what could happen, like I do with all the last plan implementations I've been a part of, like I know we're going to save at a minimum 20% of the time. So I look at the entire schedule and I see, where are we? How's my team feel? Is now a good time to make our daily stand-ups better? If morale is low, the answer is no, unless morale is low because of really poor information exchanges or exchanges in those meetings. And then that's a different, you got to think about this stuff. You can't just take a checklist and think you're going to get there. You have to come back and look holistically and get into the details, zoom back, check how the people are doing, and then evaluate again. We're in this continuous checking PDCA ourselves, just as we're doing this last plan implementation. A lot of people misunderstand it and they just see like, oh, it's just sticky notes on a wall. I've heard so many people just say like, it's just sticky notes on the wall. And I've never seen a good implementation when people make that statement. It always couples with a very bad implementation and dissatisfied people. Now, when you holistically look at, like Vic said, are people jazzed about this or not? Are people excited to come to a planning meeting? Do a plus delta at the end of your session and see what people say. I had a session where we did a plus delta recently, Vic, and one of the foremen, he said that this meeting was too long. And I told the leadership team, I said, of all the people in the meeting, if you look at it, was overwhelmingly 21 pluses, and we had 5 deltas, and 1 delta said the meeting was too long. That individual came to the meeting unprepared. They did not have their production rates. They did not have their crew sizes figured out. They had no understanding of what the scope was. So they were just sitting there like a bump on a log. And I told that individual, I was like, I'm recording your delta. However, I'm asterisking why you're making the statement. And I said, I recommend to you, the next time you come to the meeting like this, you come prepared. Come with your estimate, come with your what crews you've anticipated, come with some color ups of how you're going to go through the area, come ready to negotiate your work. You were completely unprepared. You answered no question about what the scope was. People had to tell you based on their parallel experiences what would be reasonable. And I said, so I lovingly record this delta. However, I'm holding you accountable to come prepared next time.
Yeah. Yeah. So leadership is going to have to hold on and stand strong in making sure things get done right. And of course, that leadership can come at any level. If it wasn't you, any of their colleagues could have said, Vic, we need you to come with this information because we cannot make reliable promises if we don't know that you're on top of your work, because this whole system has to click together really, really well. And so we need you to do that. Will you do that? And that changes the underlying model. The underlying model is, oh, it's crappy planning work. I mean, I could be out in the field banging nails. And now we're saying, no, this is actually important. We got to change the underlying mental model to know that this is really important. So last thing I'd say is that this industry is not going to stay static. When we're talking about doing Last Planner, we're talking about Last Planner being one example of a really important operational strategy for controlling how we get work done. We have a lot of technological change that's going to be coming here. And we're going to be designing and doing, in a sense, a lot of the constraint analysis and whole systems thinking in BIM models or in production models, 4 and 5 and D type models where we got the timing and the interactivities and so on. And we're going to have more artificial intelligence telling us when we put a task on a system, no, you can't do that because the supply chain isn't ready for this. And it should be able to tell us that in advance. And it should be sending, when we put something on a look-ahead plan 6 weeks out, the system should automatically be checking to see whether materials, designs, all of these things we talked about in the constraint analysis are going. We're going to be creating smarter and smarter systems to do this. But we have to have the understanding of why we're doing this in order to make those systems work right. Because otherwise we can, if we automate a bad system, all we get is a more efficient bad system. Right? So let's not do that.
Let's not do that. Vic, thank you so much for coming on and sharing this wisdom with with everybody. Everybody, thank you for watching. Give us some love. Give us some likes, some comments. Share this series with a friend, and start practicing some of these things. And reach out. Reach out to Vic. His contact information is on. Reach out to me. We'd love to talk about this with you. And
Yep.
we've had people reach out because of past shows, and it is like music to our ears, and it keeps us motivated to be out
Sure
there.
does. Yep.
Yeah.
And Felipe and I also have, I've written a number of articles about Last Planner on the Lean Construction blog. We have getting down to number 10, the final series on leadership for high performance teams. That series on the blog. There's a lot of good stuff out there for you, and we're here for you.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Get out there and go beyond Post-it notes on a wall. Very special thanks to my guest. I'm Felipe Engineer-Manriquez. The EBFC Show is created by Felipe and produced by a passion to build easier and better. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, everybody. Let's go build.